Ever wondered if you were born in the wrong era? Greetings everyone. Today, we're exploring the strange, and often harsh laws of medieval Europe. From the exclusive right of nobles to play tennis to the peculiar restrictions on what people could eat. These laws paint a vivid picture of a society vastly different from our own. We'll also delve into the severe punishments meted out for seemingly minor offenses, and the bizarre methods used to determine guilt or innocence. If you find this video interesting, please support us by hitting the like button. Now, let's get started. First of all, there was a medieval law regarding a certain sport in 1485. It became illegal for anyone other than nobles to play tennis, except at Christmas time. Why was tennis permitted exclusively for the nobility, while being prohibited for the common classes? One reason was that it was considered problematic to gamble over who would win or lose. But that is not the only reason. At the time, tennis was a sport that required expensive equipment, complicated rules, and social etiquette. For this reason, tennis was considered a sport for the upper class only, and eventually came to be called the sport of kings. This led to the prohibition of tennis among the lower classes, as a means to uphold the feudal societal structure. Thus, to preserve their dignity and social status, the nobility legally banned tennis among the lower classes. Incidentally, Henry VII and Henry VIII actually liked to play tennis, and Henry VIII in particular is said to have been quite good at it. For a change, the town of Newmarket in England is known as the birthplace of horse racing. Horse racing dates back to the 12th century, but it spread after King James I built his palace in Newmarket in 1606. Eventually, horse racing developed into a major business. Horses became an important source of income. Newmarket had a very valuable law. In Newmarket, an unusual law banned blowing one's nose in public streets, a measure taken to safeguard the health of horses. Why was there such a law? Actually, this law was to prevent horses from getting sick from putting human snot in their mouths. In other words, it was to protect the health of horses. As I mentioned earlier, horses were an important source of income for the town. So they were trying to protect the health of the horses by making this kind of law. Still, I am a bit skeptical as to how a person blowing his nose could get it into the horse's mouth. This is not the only law that protects the health of horses. People walking around with a cold or fever had to pay a fine. By law, one might say that the health of the horse was more important than the health and livelihood of the people. I mentioned earlier that feudal society was maintained by prohibiting tennis in the lower classes. But as this shows, social status had great significance in medieval life. In particular, people at the bottom of the social ladder, peasants who worked and lived under landowners or concentrations of near-slave labor, had basically no freedom. For example, suppose serfs wanted to get married. During the Middle Ages, serfs required the landowner's permission to marry. Especially in cases where the bride would live on the lord's land, a rule more stringently applied to men. In fact, if a low-status woman became a widow, the lord could coerce her into marrying another man. If she refused, she was punished. If they were worried about being single, it would still be unbearable to be forced by their lords to remarry. And so, even after marriage, the couple is still bound by the law. The laws that bound the couple were laws that restricted when people could have sexual intercourse. Those laws set days on which intercourse was forbidden and abstained from. Why was sexual intercourse prohibited on specific days? The reason was medieval religion. Let us see how many days of abstinence there were. There are many theories, but first of all, couples were only permitted to engage in sexual intercourse on 3 days of the week: Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. It was forbidden to have intercourse on Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday because of Christian teachings and events. Furthermore, it was not only prohibited on each day of the week. There were multiple times throughout the year when it was prohibited for long periods of time. For a period of 30 to 60 days before and after Christmas and other Christian observances, sexual intercourse was forbidden. Altogether, there were about 130 days per year when sexual intercourse was prohibited. And during these days, women were not even allowed to make eye contact with men in order not to arouse their desires. I am sure that some people did not want to follow such a law. But many people obeyed the law and followed celibacy. Now, changing the topic to the law in the medieval fashion world. In 15th century England, long and pointy-toed shoes were very popular as a fashion item for men. It was believed that the longer the toe of the shoe, the more masculine and wealthy a man was. The length of the toe could extend as long as 23 inches. This fashion trend gradually spread from the nobility to the peasants. The royal family seemed to feel threatened by this situation. The royal family was concerned that the extravagant fashion choices of the lower classes might disrupt the distinct class system of the Middle Ages. The law that was issued in 1463 and lasted until 1604 was this: no person, unless they were an earl, nobleman, or knight, was allowed to wear shoes with toes extending more than 2 inches. This law seems akin to a rule one might find in a middle school. The fine for violating this law was 3 shillings and 4 pence. The modern equivalent of $135. And there were many medieval laws restricting what people could eat and drink. Many of these laws were designed to prevent the lower classes from eating as lavishly as the nobility, in other words, to make clear the difference between the status of the nobility and the virtual classes. However, there were also laws that were established without regard to status, which made one tilt one's head involuntarily. Take, for example, the law of 1336. It forbade the serving of more than one meal, regardless of status, except on holidays such as Christmas. And the most peculiar aspect of this law was its detailed specification that even items used as sauces counted as one dish as soup. Thus, there were a number of strange laws in Europe at that time. And if you committed a crime against these laws, you were naturally punished, and there were many punishments that would be unthinkable today. Here are some of them. In medieval England, there were far more peasants than nobles. In such a situation, the upper-class authorities wanted to prevent the peasants from revolting and to maintain their own power. So they sometimes inflicted spectacular punishments for small crimes. For example, flogging. However, floggings were still a lesser punishment. And punishments such as cutting off one or both hands were also common. Moreover, these punishments were also inflicted on relatively minor crimes, such as theft and disturbing the public order, as well as vagrancy. And in fact, it was not only those who committed crimes who were severely punished. Even those who were not sure if they had sinned or not were punished severely. From our modern point of view, it seems outrageous that people should be punished for a crime they were not sure they had committed. However, in the Middle Ages, even the trial to determine guilt was truly terrible. The very trial itself to determine whether a suspected criminal was guilty or not guilty was a form of torture. There are 3 types of torture to determine guilt. The first is the torture of fire. A person suspected of guilt is placed in the hands of the accused with a red-hot iron rod, and must walk a distance of 9 feet. The hand was then bandaged, and if the wound did not heal within 3 days, the accused was found guilty. The second method, water torture, involved binding the accused and throwing them into water. The decision of guilt or innocence was based on whether the person floated or sank after being thrown into the water. If the person floated, it meant that he or she was not accepted into the water. Therefore, the judgment was that the person was guilty. To be found not guilty, you would have to have a lot of rocks in your pocket. And the third was trial by combat. In the trial by combat, the accused and the accuser were forced into a duel, with the outcome determining guilt or innocence. Fighting and trial, at first glance, seem to have nothing to do with each other, but of course, there is a reason for this. In fact, in the Middle Ages, it was believed that God gives victory to the innocent. Thus, the winner was considered innocent and the loser was considered guilty. And, of course, the loser in this killing would die. So, the loser risked his or her life to accuse the other party of a crime. People in the Middle Ages had to be very careful about what they said. It was a religious law that punished blasphemy. Blasphemy was the act of speaking ill of something sacred, and blasphemy was considered a serious offense for which severe punishment was given. Violators faced severe punishments, including stoning or hanging. Perhaps the most harrowing punishment was the extraction of the tongue using hot pincers. By these laws, the Catholic Church was trying to maintain order and control. As can be seen from the severity of the punishments for blasphemy, religion was a very powerful force in the Middle Ages. And, at that time, science was still in its infancy. And people who relied on religion tried to understand the world by regarding the natural phenomena that occurred in the world as the will of God. However, there were some phenomena that could not be regarded as the will of God. These were unfortunate events such as disease, crop failure, and the death of livestock. These were not considered God's will, but were thought to be caused by something else. So who was considered responsible for those unfortunate events? It was witches. In those days, witches were believed to be able to summon evil spirits and demons. As monstrous and alien beings, they were often banished or punished. In 1542, the Witch Act was enacted by the English Parliament. Under this law, those accused of witchcraft were sentenced to death. Witch hunts in accordance with this law were very active, especially in southeastern England, and it is said that more than 500 people were executed in witch hunts between the 15th and 18th centuries. Were there really witches? There is no way to confirm this. But it is said that most of the women who were said to be witches were poor old women who just kept cats. In modern times, laws are established to protect people's lives. Yet, in the Middle Ages, it often seemed that the law caused more suffering than protection. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Aren't you glad to be born in the modern age? I think so. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Take care and see you in the next video. Goodbye.